When it's sunny June and December too, or in the winter time or spring, there'll be peace without end, every neighbor a friend, with every man a king.
What do you think about that?
I think it's fine.
I think it's fine. Huh?
Senator, I think it's fine.
Okay.
Capitalism has been the economic system of the United States since its founding. Rarely has an outspoken anti-capitalist gained support in the United States, and the only time periods in which such a figure's election seems possible have been periods of great economic despair. Capitalism has created within the United States great fortune and wealth, and has produced some of the richest corporations and individuals in history. But that is exactly the problem the modern American has with capitalism. The natural phenomenon known as the Pareto distribution is a concept which manifests itself everywhere in nature. It states that 1 to 2% of a given group will be hyper-efficient and produce 80% of the product of said group. For example, 2% of workers in a company will likely produce 80% of the output. 2% of composers wrote 80% of the classical music that we listen today. And of those producers, 2% of their work represents 80% of the music that we hear from them. This distribution even manifests itself in communist societies, which is partially why the Soviet Union fell and Venezuela is on the brink of collapse. The question is, why is this important to understand? The conservative answer to those who end up on the low end of the Pareto distribution has always been one of ignorance and neglect. We tend to believe that because the distribution is natural, that it is therefore good and just and ought to be. This mentality produces socialists and communists. It produces people who seek to revolt against the system that seemingly doesn't care about them. But what is truly the answer to this problem? In 1819, Pope Leo XIII wrote Rerum Novarum, or Of Revolutionary Change in the World. His writings sought to bring the Church to address the condition of the working classes and discuss the relationship between a government and its citizens. His teachings rejected both unrestricted capitalism and socialism, and formed the basis for the distributist philosophy. Pope Leo was simply the beginning of distributist thought, however. In the 1950s, G.K. Chesterton and similar writer Hilaire Belloc formed the foundational writings for what we now know as distributism. Chesterton foresaw a Europe which would transcend the classical markets built upon self-interest, one which would rise up to the calling of true Aristotelian Christian morality, and one which would employ a modern form of the medieval guild-style regulation of industrial powers, which would not only preserve independent households, but return to the concept of the private enterprise, which Chesterton claimed had been lost at the hands of capitalism. His claim is certainly one to ponder, as the modern capitalist household is no longer a singular private entity in any form or fashion, especially with the advent of the internet. Privacy does not exist in a capitalist system, as every choice made by an individual affects the market, which affects everyone else living in the system. The corporate entities who rule not only the market, but the government through lobbying, are as big as the government themselves, and with that size comes their immense power over anyone in their sphere of control. Those who advocate for classical markets as the solution to this problem, most notably the self-proclaimed anarcho-capitalists, seem to not understand that this corporate oligarchy is the inevitable end result of the free market in its current form. Capitalism for capitalism's sake, which American conservatives have been championing since the end of the Cold War, always allows the greedy to exploit the system. It is in fact the absence of morality in the capitalist system which inevitably leads to such ruin, which is exactly what distributism seeks to solve. Chesterton saw Christian morality as the keystone of distributist thought, making it extremely clear that the economic system could not function without a strong moral ground. That is exactly what our founding fathers made explicitly clear was the case for the American system in their age, hence why the American system has become increasingly corrupt and tyrannical as our society loosens its grip on morality. As he explains in his book, The Thing, business, especially big business, is now organized like an army. It is, as some would say, a sort of mild militarism without bloodshed, a militarism without the military virtues. Huey Long was the latest in the line of distributists. Long was the governor of Louisiana during the Depression, and prior to that had served as a lawyer prosecuting corrupt corporations. Huey Long viewed both laissez-faire capitalism, the economic system of the West, and socialism as equally flawed and exploitative. Thomas Stork, an author and proud traditionalist distributist, claims that both socialism and capitalism are products of the European Enlightenment and are thus modernizing and anti-traditional forces. He is correct in his claim, as the Enlightenment produced both economic systems. But what then is the solution to the problem of America's economic system? Rather than placing the means of production in the hands of a small group of big business elites or corrupt government officials, distributism seeks to, distribute the means of production across as many individual entities as possible, thus theoretically eradicating much of the tangible effects that come about because of the Pareto distribution manifesting itself. Distributism favors small-scale cooperative organizations, such as small businesses, and distributists have historically implemented large-scale antitrust laws and regulations to prevent corporations from stealing an individual market. It is important to note that distributism still maintains the citizen's right to property, and there is still a market in a distributist economy. However, it is not as centrally planned as socialism, nor as laissez-faire as capitalism. The United States is a very interesting country. It spans a continent in size and contains within it a variety of biomes and natural resource deposits. Metals, oil, plants, animals, flatlands, mountains, caves, tundra, and deserts all reside within the United States. This has allowed the USA to be a historical outlier in the world, as it can at times be fully self-sufficient in terms of food, resources, and trade. The United States has undergone periods of economic growth simply by trading within its own borders and with its close neighbors, and has achieved a social mindset which breeds the kind of America First political policy that has been extremely historically popular. From Thomas Jefferson to Theodore Roosevelt, Richard Nixon to presidential candidate Pat Buchanan, and of course the 45th president Donald Trump, America First ideology has been an everlasting force within American politics. Many groups over the years have adopted the concepts which make up the America First movement, concepts such as energy self-sufficiency, agricultural self-sufficiency, the prosperity of the middle working classes, and Amerocentric foreign policy. What does this have to do with distributism, though? Well, distributism advocates for the means of production to be distributed amongst as many people in small groups as possible, as we've already made clear. In a country like America, where it's possible to be completely self-sufficient, a system like distributism would make sense in practice, as there would be no need to integrate the economy with the greater capitalistic or socialistic economies of other countries. It would also prevent monopolies from forming in both the American and international markets, and generate a higher standard of living for American citizens. The issue with implementing distributism on a large scale is that it would be difficult for the American economy to be settled down enough to radically shift the way things work. The special element of distributism which allows this to work, however, is its inherent conservative nature. Distributism is built within small communities, so the system is community-oriented. It takes a middle position between capitalism's ever-present focus on the individual and communism's focus on the unified collective. Distributism acknowledges the role the individual plays within their small community, and the role those communities play in upholding the society at large. This would be a reversion to a pre-Enlightenment era, in which the community was the backbone of society, not the overwhelming collective or the shallow individual and corporate interests. This is not to say that distributism fully rejects the concept of collectivism, as distributists advocate for nationalism and patriotism. Distributists encourage unity within a country, community, and most importantly, a family. There are many valid critiques of distributism, and specifically its implementation in the United States. But many of these critiques can be defeated by a greater understanding of how distributism actually functions. For example, critics of distributism may claim that a distributist economy does not account for real-world factors such as land fertility. If one local community has poor land, how will they feed themselves? And likewise, if another community has an abundance of fertile land, will they keep the surplus food which they will inevitably produce? And is giving it away truly distributist? The answer is yes. Cooperation between communities is inherently distributist. The example of agriculture is an important one, as it is the historical precedent for human interaction. But if a specific community, for whatever reason, does not have the means to produce a commodity, objectives will be set within and without the community to produce said commodity. Cooperation between communities is viable in a distributist economy, and it is also important to note that if land is unsuitable for development, it will probably go undeveloped. The reason nobody ships food constantly to Antarctica is because it is expensive and not worth the risk of setting up civilization there. Similarly, if land is unsuitable within the nation, people are probably not going to inhabit it, and then turn around and plead with the rest of the country to constantly supply them with needs that they neglected to account for. It just doesn't happen. Now, some may make the claim that allowing these communities to interact will inevitably produce a capitalist system. This is only partially true, as the interaction within communities will act as a market to foster growth and development in communities. This is only necessary to bind the nation together, as an array of self-sufficient communities isn't necessarily conducive to a national identity. The sharing of ideas, customs, and goods, however, is what fosters a national identity, and that is not absent in the distributist economy. Another critique of distributism is that there is no incentive for the worker to actually put in what he is capable of. This is the greatest critique of socialism and communism, the idea that the efficient worker feeling cheated would kill the incentive of the ambitious. This is not, in fact, the case in a distributist economy. The ambitious are rewarded for their labor, and businesses can evolve in communities and larger markets. The restriction comes on only monopolized businesses. Restricting corporate entities for the benefit of the everyday civilian is necessary to prevent the greedy from taking the place of the ambitious. Distributism defends ambitious and hyper-productive members of society by justly rewarding them for their effort while weeding out the greedy and corrupt. This is because the bottom line of distributism is to put America and the American worker first. The classic American ideal of the entrepreneur is still respected in distributism and is kept from being tarnished by the caricature that is the greedy corporation. This is why Huey Long, during his time as a lawyer, sued the corrupt Standard Oil Corporation. He did not attack oil corporations for being successful. He attacked a single oil corporation which choked the market into submission and formed an unjust monopoly over oil. Historically, distributism has only been implemented or has come close to such during times of great economic depression, like the Great Depression. If predictions prove true, America looks to be heading for an economic depression or a recession on par or worse than the 2008 financial crisis, with some analyses comparing the weight of the predicted crisis to that of the Great Depression. During this time, in order to effectively minimize suffering among Americans, it may be smart to begin adopting distributism at the local or state levels. The most unfortunate thing for Americans during the predicted crisis is that the elite American oligarchs would be relatively unaffected. The members of the upper class who run monopolies which sell jobs to China and pursue globalist economies antithetical to the interest of the American people would remain in their positions of power. Under a distributist economy, the American people would truly feel the benefits of their hard work ethic and unwavering optimism. The question is, who will bring about this era of prosperity to fruition? I'm Jacob Peterson with the People's National Party. This has been the Voice of America.